My name is Mara Ellison, and on my 27th birthday, I learned just how small I was in the version of the world my parents curated. They lived in Tiburon glass walls, infinity pool, matching electric SUVs, the kind of house that smelled like old money and new guilt. I lived in a one-bedroom walk-up in the Mission District, where the pipes rattled in the winter and the oven door only closed if you kicked it. But it was mine. And for the first time in my life, the space around me didn't judge me for existing. My parents, Leonard and Camille Ellison, were masters of presentation. Photos arranged, lighting perfect, smiles rehearsed. To them, success was what you could frame on a mantle, not what you built at a M in a tiny apartment while chasing freelance deadlines. I worked as a branding designer, small startups, local cafes, the occasional corporate contract if I was lucky. It was unstable, inconsistent, and absolutely mine. Every invoice mattered. Every client referral felt like oxygen. My parents never asked what I actually did. They preferred questions like, "When will you get a real job?" Or "Are you still living in that neighborhood?" We kept things polite, surface level, family. Gatherings felt less like reunions and more like PR events where my mother monitored every detail and my father nodded at the appropriate times. The last time they surprised me was at my college graduation, a moment I'd paid for with loans and sleeplessness. They handed me a gift-wrapped book titled Money Management for Young Adults while I stood there carrying almost $80,000 in student debt. I thanked them anyway. I learned early that gratitude was expected, even when the gesture missed its mark by a mile. Still, I kept my head down. I worked. I saved when I could. I built a life that fit me, not their expectations. And yet, on the night of my 27th birthday, under chandeliers I couldn't afford to look at for too long, I would discover a secret so large it would collapse everything I thought I knew about them. A $2,750,000 trust fund that should have been mine years ago, but was n single quotes t.by the time I reached Atelier Vienne. The kind of restaurant where the cheapest entrée cost half my grocery budget. My anxiety had settled into something dull and heavy. I walked through the glass doors in the only black dress I owned, praying the seams wouldn't betray me under the chandelier glare. My parents were already seated, of course they were. My mother, Camille, looked like she'd walked out of a luxury perfume ad. Red silk dress, perfect blowout, a smile sharpened into a weapon. My father sat beside her in a navy suit tailored within an inch of its life, scrolling through his phone like this dinner was just another meeting he needed to endure. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," my mom said, air kissing me so her lipstick wouldn't smudge. "You look tired," my dad added, which was his version of affection. Before I could even sit down, they launched into a monologue about their Napa weekend, their kitchen remodel, and the new self-driving update on their SUV. I murmured appropriate reactions, swallowing the reminder that I'd lost my job 3 days ago. When I quietly mentioned it, my father nodded, like I had informed him of the weather. And my mother simply said, "Well, maybe this will motivate you to try a more stable career." The waiter poured champagne I couldn't pronounce. The room glowed with crystal and gold. Everyone looked like they belonged there except me. And then the door opened. My grandfather, Everett Ellison, walked in. Conversation froze. Even the servers stopped mid-step. He wasn't a man who attended family dinners. He summoned them. Silver-haired, sharp-eyed, moving with the slow, deliberate confidence of someone used to being listened to. "Mara," he said, pulling me into a real hug, the kind that anchors you. "Happy birthday." My parents exchanged a glance. Fear flickered behind my mother's perfect smile. Grandpa took his seat beside me, ordered whiskey neat, then lifted his glass not for a toast, but for a strike. "So, Mara," he said casually, "tell me, how have you been using your $2,750,000 trust fund these past 2 years?" The air shattered. I blinked. What? Every fork stopped. My mother's hand froze mid-gesture. My father went pale. Grandpa set his glass down and repeated, slower, "The trust I established when you were born." The one your parents were supposed to transfer to you at 25. My throat tightened. I never received anything. Grandpa leaned back. Then, he said, voice calm but lethal, where did the money go? And in that moment, I realized this wasn't a birthday dinner. It was an ambush, and my parents weren't the targets. I was the witness. The private dining room felt suddenly too small, like the walls were leaning in to hear the answer my parents couldn't give. My grandfather's question, where did the money go, hung in the chandelier light like a guillotine. My mother recovered first, or at least tried to. Dad, she laughed, but the sound cracked at the edges. You're confused. There must be some mix-up. Mara never had Camille, just her name. Spoken quietly, but with the weight of decades behind it. She went still. My father's jaw flexed, the vein in his temple twitching. He didn't speak. He didn't even look at me. He just stared at the linen tablecloth as if the truth might be written somewhere in the folds. Grandpa nodded to the maitre d'. Private room, now. Within minutes we were moved, plates abandoned, champagne forgotten. A door clicked shut behind us. The air shifted heavier, colder. Already waiting inside were Michelle, my grandfather's longtime assistant, and a corporate attorney I'd met only once at a holiday function. They weren't smiling. Michelle opened a tablet. Mara, this is the trust established on your first birthday. Original deposit, $1 million. With compounding interest and investment growth, it should be worth approximately $2,750,000 today. My breath caught. Should be. She tapped the screen. As of this morning, the balance is 140,000. It felt like the floor tilted. My parents said nothing. Not confusion. Not denial. Just silence, the kind that confirms everything. Grandpa leaned forward, folding his hands. Leonard, Camille, explain. My father cleared his throat, voice thin. We had expenses. That, Grandpa replied, is $3 million worth of expenses. My mother finally spoke. We managed it for her future. We didn't want her wasting it. I laughed. A small broken sound. Grandpa didn't. Mara, he said, turning to me, his eyes fierce with protection. I hadn't realized he still possessed. We're going to find out exactly what they did, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one swallowing the consequences. Michelle's fingers moved across the tablet with clinical precision, and the room felt colder with every swipe. Here are the withdrawals, she said, her voice steady. All traced to accounts controlled by Leonard and Camille Ellison. My parents flinched at their own names. The attorney slid a stack of printed documents toward me. Black ink. Cold numbers. No room for excuses. Michelle began reading. Mortgage payoff for $120,000. 2 luxury electric vehicles to $130,000. Kitchen and pool renovations $310,000. Investment in Camille Ellison. Home designs 475,000. She paused. My heartbeat roared in my ears. Then came the one that hollowed me out. Purchase of a coastal property in Carmel, $1.4 million. Titled under Leonard and Camille Ellison. I stared at the page. A beach house. Bought with my future. My mother's voice shook. We meant to transfer it to you later. Once things stabilized, my father added quickly. We were protecting the principal. There is no principal, Michelle said without emotion. There's debt, and a property you do not legally own. Grandpa leaned forward, folding his hands. This wasn't protection. It was theft. My mother shot up, eyes shiny and defensive. We are her parents. We had every right. No, Grandpa cut in sharply. What you had was a responsibility. The attorney tapped the folder. At this level of unauthorized withdrawal, the state considers it felony financial fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. I felt the air leave my lungs. My parents weren't just careless, they were criminals. Grandpa turned to me, voice quieter now, gentler, but bruised at the edges. Mara, we're going to recover everything we can. But before we continue, I need to know if you want to proceed. My parents' eyes snapped to mine, full of panic. For once, I didn't look away. For a long, stretched moment, no one spoke. The documents lay between us like a dissected body, every cut, every missing piece, every wound mapped in ink. My mother finally broke the silence. "Mara," she said softly, as if speaking to a frightened child, "you have to understand. We managed the money because we knew you weren't ready. You're impulsive. You take unstable jobs. You live in a risky neighborhood. We were protecting your future." I blinked at her. "By draining it?" Her lips tightened. "By guiding it." My father nodded, seizing the lifeline. "We stepped in because we knew you'd waste it on rent, or student loans, or some temporary lifestyle. We invested in things that would appreciate, things that would build long-term security." "Security for who?" I asked. They didn't answer. Grandpa leaned back slowly, his jaw clenching in a way I'd only seen once before at my grandmother's funeral. "When someone tried to turn the service into a charity promotion, Camille," he said quietly, "you didn't guide anything. You took it." My mother bristled. "We had every right." "No," he snapped, sharper than I'd ever heard him. "You had access." "That's not the same thing." A cold electric stillness filled the room. I looked at the renovation receipts, the Tesla payments, the Carmel property paperwork. Each line was a truth I didn't want but could no longer ignore. "You told me to budget better," I whispered. "You told me to save smarter. You gave me a book on financial literacy while stealing every cent meant to help me." My mother's eyes filled with tears for the consequences. "Not for me. We were going to give it back," she insisted. "Eventually." "When?" I asked. "When the house doubled in value. When you were done remodeling. When I stopped being useful as a scapegoat." My father's face hardened. "We made mistakes, but we're family. Families sacrifice for each other." "Sacrifice?" My voice cracked. Losing my job was a sacrifice. Choosing rent over groceries was a sacrifice. You two weren't sacrificing, you were shopping. The truth hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. I wasn't confused. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't ungrateful. I was naming reality for the first time. This wasn't guidance. It wasn't protection. It was theft, and I finally said it out loud. My mother's tears had barely begun when my grandfather lifted a hand, silencing the room. "Michelle," he said. "Show her." Michelle tapped her tablet again, and a new document appeared. Confirmation numbers, airline logos, departure dates. "These," she said, turning the screen toward me, "are 2 one-way tickets to Costa Rica. Purchased 3 days ago. Departure scheduled for Monday." My breath caught. "You were leaving?" I whispered. My father exhaled slowly, defeated. "We needed a fresh start. The Carmel property hasn't sold yet. Things have been tight. They had called my struggle a responsibility, but their own collapse an inconvenience." Grandpa's jaw tightened. "You were going to flee the country after spending your daughter's inheritance." My mother pressed trembling fingers to her forehead. "We didn't know this would blow up. We just needed time." "No," Grandpa said. "You needed money that wasn't yours." He looked at me, then really looked, his eyes soft with both fury and sorrow. "Mara, here are the keys," he said, sliding a small metal ring across the table. They were warm from my mother's palm, the metal imprinting into my skin like a brand. "The Carmel house, the cars. The accounts will begin transferring them back immediately," he continued. "But legal action is your decision." My parents stared at me with a mix of terror and pleading. For the first time in my life, their future depended on my voice, and I finally realized so did mine. 3 days later, I stood in the marble lobby of Ellison Holdings, a place I'd only ever seen from the outside, 40 stories of glass and steel piercing the San Francisco fog. I hadn't slept much since the dinner. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's shaking hand dropping the keys, and the Costa Rica tickets flashing like a warning light. Michelle met me at the elevator, her expression unreadable. "They're already upstairs," she said quietly. "Your grandfather wants you present for everything." My stomach tightened. "Both of them?" She nodded. "They came to negotiate." The word felt wrong in my mouth. Negotiate what? Their consequences? My forgiveness? The elevator doors opened onto the top floor, polished concrete, floor-to-ceiling windows, the base stretching out in a shimmering blue curve. Grandpa sat behind his desk, posture straight, jaw set. Across from him were my parents. My father looked 10 years older. My mother's lipstick was smudged, a crack running through the fade she'd worn my entire life. "Mara," Grandpa said, "sit." The room fell into a suffocating silence. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "We never intended for this to escalate," he said. "We were struggling. We were trying to stay afloat." "I understand greed," Grandpa replied coldly. "I built a company by recognizing it." My mother leaned forward, tears already forming. "We love her. We were going to tell her eventually." "When?" I asked. "After you sold the Carmel house?" Silence answered. Grandpa motioned to the attorney, who dropped a stack of printed bank statements onto the desk. "The forensic audit is complete," he said. "Every car, renovation, property, and personal purchase traced. Approximately $1.9 million recovered through asset seizures." My father inhaled sharply. "Recovered? You didn't recover anything," the attorney snapped. "The law did." I felt myself detach, like I was floating above the room, watching their lies peel away one by one. Michelle handed me a folder filled with photos and receipts. "You should see what they valued more than you," she whispered. My mother broke, then, hands shaking, voice cracking. "Mara, please. Prison? We're your parents." I looked her dead in the eyes. "You weren't acting like them." And for the first time, she had no defense left to hide behind. The room felt suspended, silent, except for the distant hum of the city 40 floors below. My parents stared at me like I was a jury of one, the only person standing between them and the consequences they'd earned. My mother leaned forward first, desperation cracking through her polished voice. "Mara, honey, families don't take each other to court. We made mistakes, yes, but prison? That's unthinkable." I finished. "So was stealing from me." My father's composure, always his prized possession, finally slipped. "We were trying to protect our lifestyle." "If the Carmel house had sold, you mean my house," I said. He flinched. Grandpa didn't move or speak, but his presence filled the room. He was letting me decide legally, morally, personally, for most of my life. Keeping the peace had meant swallowing my anger, softening my voice, pretending harm wasn't harm as long as it came wrapped in family excuses. But peace built on silence wasn't peace. It was captivity. Michael, the attorney, cleared his throat. "Miss Ellison, the charges: financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, carry potential prison time. But whether to proceed is entirely your choice." My parents' eyes locked on me. Hope, fear, entitlement, all tangled together. I thought of every late rent notice, every skipped meal, every freelance scramble while they bought beachfront sunsets with my future. I took a breath that felt like stepping into my own life. "I'm moving forward," I said. "File everything." My mother gasped. My father's face drained of color. Grandpa nodded, once firm, unwavering. "The decision is made." For the first time ever, I wasn't the one sacrificing for their comfort. They were facing the consequences, and I was finally free to choose myself. The days that followed moved faster than I could process. Once the papers were filed, everything shifted into motion. An avalanche finally released. Court orders were signed. Accounts were frozen. Assets, the ones bought with my trust, were seized. My parents' carefully curated life unraveled with startling speed. Both Teslas? Repossessed. The Carmel Beach house? Transferred immediately into my name. The country club membership, the designer furniture, the investment portfolios, all liquidated to repay what they'd taken. Grandpa's legal team moved with the precision of a scalpel. Every cent found a path home. But the strangest part wasn't watching their wealth vanish. It was watching their narrative crumble. For years, they'd cast me as the irresponsible one, the struggling daughter who just needed guidance, the one who wasn't ready for real financial responsibility. But the truth, cold, documented, undeniable, told a different story. They weren't protecting me. They were living off me. And now, stripped of their resources, they were forced into a modest motel outside Oakland, far from the marble floors and manicured lawns they once worshipped. Meanwhile, I unlocked the door to the Carmel property for the first time. The home that was supposed to be mine all along. Sunlight spilled across the hardwood floor, and for the first time in years, so did possibility. The Carmel house was nothing like the chaotic apartment I'd been surviving in. It smelled faintly of salt and citrus, like someone had tried to mask guilt with expensive candles. Still, when I stepped inside, the silence felt clean, not empty. Open. For the first time in years, I wasn't calculating bills in the back of my mind or bracing for another email rejection. I had a home. I had financial breathing room. And I had proof, literal documents, that my struggle had never been the result of failure, only theft. I spent the first week restoring the space, not with contractors or decorators, but with intent. I scrubbed countertops, washed linens, replaced the sterile art staged for potential buyers with sketches from my own portfolio. Every small change felt like reclaiming something I didn't know I'd lost, the right to feel grounded. Grandpa visited one afternoon, leaning heavily on his cane. "You're settling in," he said, taking in the sunlight streaming across the newly rearranged living room. "I'm learning too," I replied. He nodded, eyes softening. "Stability isn't about what you own. It's about knowing you can stand on your own feet." And for the first time, I believed him. Work followed naturally, not out of desperation, but rhythm. Referrals from Grandpa's network, a steady stream of clients who valued what I created. No more late-night panic. No more stretching $50 over 3 meals. Just living, slow, deliberate, and finally mine, with each sunrise over the ocean. A little more of the old Mara, the one who apologized for taking up space, faded away, and in her place grew someone new, someone steady, someone certain, someone who no longer mistook silence for peace, someone rebuilding herself from the foundation up. A few weeks after moving into Carmel, Grandpa invited me to dinner at a quiet little bistro overlooking the marina. He looked smaller somehow. Age had begun pressing into his shoulders, but his eyes held the same unwavering clarity. "You did what I couldn't," he said over soup he barely touched. "You drew a line." I stirred my spoon slowly. "You taught me how." He smiled, tired but proud. "Your parents always believed blood was enough. That family is automatic. But character, Mara, character is earned. And they spent years proving who they are." The words settled deep, heavier than judgment, lighter than freedom. "They didn't lose you because of the money," Grandpa continued. "They lost you because they never chose to be your parents." I swallowed. "Does that make us still a family?" He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "It makes us one." In the quiet months that followed, as I rebuilt my work, my routines, and the parts of myself I'd long abandoned. A truth slowly surfaced one I had resisted for years. Family is not defined by who shares your DNA. Family is defined by who shows up when everything falls apart. My parents believed that biology entitled them to my trust, my forgiveness, and my silence. They expected loyalty without offering protection, respect, or honesty. They believed their choices weren't subject to consequence simply because they were mom and dad. But love isn't measured in last names. It's measured in actions. And sometimes the most painful kind of betrayal comes not from strangers, but from the people who taught you the meaning of the word home. What I learned slowly, then all at once is this: you are allowed to outgrow the people who harmed you. You are allowed to choose yourself over their comfort. You are allowed to build something better, even if it means walking away from what you once hoped they'd be. Grandpa wasn't family because we shared blood. He was family because he chose me consistently, fiercely, without needing anything in return. And in choosing justice over silence, I finally chose myself too. Final message for listeners: if parts of Mara's story hit close to home, remember this: you are not obligated to protect the people who broke you. You are allowed to reclaim your life, your voice, and your future. Family is not who demands your loyalty, it's who earns it. And if you're standing at the edge of a difficult choice, know this: choosing yourself is never the wrong decision.